All right, we're going. George Danner, thanks for coming in. We've done
Thank
a
you for
number.
having me.
We've done a number of things together before, but
have?
never this, right? So not this show. And so I'm hoping that you're not like it hasn't hurt your feelings that I haven't had you on already.
My feelings are very
I'm
hurt.
28 episodes in. But
I assume you had to get it perfected before.
well, the thing is, for about the first 20 episodes, nobody pays attention. So you don't want to waste the good guests early on, because nobody's watching, nobody's listening. Good. And we're gonna talk about the future of work and AI. But first, finally, now I've had you on at least 2 or 3 of the oil and gas
Yes.
technology podcasts and maybe some live streams, but never have I had a copy of your book like with me. So I
Yes.
finally got a copy of the book.
My second book.
What camera are we on? Are we on that one? Your second book. Oh, that's right. The Executive's How-To Guide. I got to put my glasses on. You probably know what it says. The Executive's How-To Guide to Automation, Mastering AI and Algorithm-Driven Business. Now, the interesting thing is, when did you write this?
2018 was when that was released.
Yeah, so you were a little ahead of the hype with AI and algorithm driven. I mean, now it's all the rage, but that was
There was, back when I was writing it, of course, it took me 2 years to write it. So it was actually written.
this little
in,
book took you 2 years to write.
It took me 2 years. Listen, writing books is hard work. I got to tell you.
I know it is. I put it right here.
In those years, AI was recognized. Certainly doesn't get the mentions that it gets today.
Right.
It was the sole purview of a lot of people in academia, a lot of scientists, but there was some exciting stuff going on there. And that's one of the reasons I wrote that book, because I was seeing things that were happening in the labs that I could foresee. I don't have a crystal ball, but I could foresee that there were practical applications were just on that doorstep back in 2016 and 2017. So I decided to write that book and weave it into this theme of automation, which had already had a little bit of tailwind behind it by that time as well. So it was timely to put that together, and I just got lucky that here we are in 2023 today, and those topics of automation and AI are at the top of everybody's list now.
Yeah. So can you pick out something in the book that you're particularly proud of? Like, I got that one right. Like, you can already 5 years later, you already see it happening, or something that you go, man, I really missed that big time.
Well, of course, I won't admit to the things that I missed. I don't think I missed very much. I did say in the book a little bit about this thing that is very definitely happening today, which is what we're taking human knowledge, human experts, and we're recapturing what human experts are very, very good at and putting those into the computer. A lot of times when people think of artificial intelligence, they think of these very sophisticated algorithms. And of course, that's part of it. But a lot of it is taking a person who has built some widget for 35 years, and they've spent 35 years doing it. All the rules are up in their heads. And now it's time to take the knowledge that they have and reconstitute it in a machine. That's definitely going on now. And so that's something that I wouldn't say I had a perfect crystal ball, like I said, back in the day, but that is something that we...
The qualitative aspect of not information, right, is...
There's a psychological aspect of sitting somebody
now
down...
you're getting freaky.
And having them explain what they do. I mean, take Michael Jordan. You know, Michael Jordan probably cannot explain the complicated physics of his body as he's moving toward the basket.
Or the trajectory of the ball, right?
And cannot
the
explain
distance
that.
and all that,
And so when you're trying to explain that to young people, what does he do? He probably just says, well, watch me and I'll do it. We don't have that luxury in the business world. We have to take somebody who's been doing a fairly complex function and ask them questions, and then they give us answers, and ask them more questions, and try to work around the words that they use. And sometimes they'll unintentionally lie to you. And so you have to put your Dr. Phil hat on. Even in AI, you have to put your Dr. Phil hat on to convince people, to persuade people to give you that knowledge that you then have to put into a computer.
I would guess that sometimes also even people, what they think they do isn't what they actually do. You know.
That is very definitely the case, and certainly not the sequence of events. You know,
Yeah.
computers are stupid. You have to tell them, okay, computer, do this first, and then do
Right.
this second, and then think about this third. Whereas humans don't think that way. I mean, I'm working with a doctor right now on a very complicated medical procedure, and she looks at X-rays and she says, "Oh, okay, that's not normal," or "Oh, okay, over here that is normal," and then you have to ask her, "Well, how did you come to that conclusion?" And she'll give you a variety of answers, but none of them are tightly wrapped in a bow, just ready to hand to
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah.
it's an important message, Michael, to people who are interested in AI and people who are interested in applying it in solving problems. That the job of AI is not just mastering the technology. That's a small part of it. The other part is figuring out the domain space
Yeah.
and figuring out what are the rules that are sort of floating in the air. That's really, frankly, the hard work of AI.
Right, right, and that leads us right to the area of immediate concern, which you and I exchanged some notes on already. But before we get to that, I kind of skipped over the part about like a little bit about you, since this is your first time on.
Sure.
Now, the thing that I always remember you saying is, and you always say, "I'm a simple mathematician."
It's true.
In fact, I heard someone say that about you recently. I can't remember who it was, but I thought, oh, I know who said that. But you have an interesting background. I mean,
It's
you're a
been a
simple
circuitous
mathematician,
path.
but that conjures up images of like some guy in a back room, like like doing like actuarial tables or something like that. But you actually had some interesting stuff that you've done.
I did, and I'm not one of these geniuses who, at 3 years old they were solving differential equations and things like that. I was just a normal kid, but I did
Well,
have.
but that's also why like you're nice to have on a podcast. So
Because I was a normal
because I
kid.
met that guy. Who's that guy that the guy that hires the team of geniuses? They made a TV show about him, and they solve like you hire them to solve really unsolvable problems. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
I don't know, Trev. But can you find out who's the guy? Like the guy that you hire, like you hire a genius and they figure out your problems. Can you? No, it's a particular guy, and they made a TV show about him, and I met him,
Really?
and I'm not having him on the podcast. I'm not saying he wants to be, but I'm not having him on because he just wasn't very nice.
A little too.
He was like, yeah, yeah, guy, yeah. Oh, I forget. He made a TV show. They made a TV show about him. He has this like team of geniuses, and
You're not talking about numbers, are you?
No, that was a good one though.
Okay.
And you hire them to solve problems that nobody can figure out, like really impossible problems.
And it's based on a real story.
Yeah, but the guy's real. But
Yeah.
they made a TV show about him.
And he was in the TV show.
No, he was not in the TV show.
Okay,
It
so
was an
they-
actor that played the TV.
They hired an
in the
actor
TV
who is probably a lot nicer.
show. Way nicer, probably. Although I don't know. So, Trevor will work on that. He'll figure that out soon. So anyway, Chris Hansen. No, that's not him. That's not Chris Hansen. Oh, the guy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 But he busts.
He's
Yeah.
the vigilante, I guess they call it.
Right. Anyway, so you have people skills. You're a nice guy, and you got to do some. And I interrupted you. You said something about when you were young or when you were.
I was not a math genius. I mean, I was average in math, to be very honest. Normal kid, grew up in a kind of a blue collar industrial town, Texas City, just south of here. And my father was an
Texas
engineer.
City's quite nice, actually.
It's a nice town.
I've lived here since 1982, and all I ever knew about Texas City was that it was just on the way to Galveston.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the mainland side of Galveston.
But yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, so my dad was an engineer at one of the plants there. My mom was a teacher, and I had a very normal sort of middle class childhood, and but I was always curious about things, and they bought me a calculator when I was young, which was really a big thing back then.
Calculators were this big then.
Well,
Like-
yeah, mine wasn't that big, but it was very cheap early calculator, and I was fascinated with using that to solve problems. And one thing led to another. I became an engineer in college, graduated from college, and worked on valves, designing valves and designing actuators for valves.
You were in the right.
So it was in
region,
yes,
yeah.
it was like being in the clockmaker's shop. I
Yeah,
got to see how gears and machinery and motors sort of work together and how to do design work, and I loved that. And then I ended up from there becoming a factory automation engineer. And what essentially that person does, what that role does, is parachute into a factory, figures out how it works, and then designs software to make it work better.
So how long ago was this?
So I graduated from college in 1983. I worked from 83 to 95, 96 on factory automation work.
So that was early days.
Early days.
For automation.
Back when we had huge computers and things like that. Things weren't as advanced back then.
But basically, like automating industrial control systems, I guess,
Yes.
right? Is you could
Was the early days.
You could write, you could create software programs that would open things and close things at certain times.
Right.
And all
That was the dawn of real automation. And if you remember, Michael, that was also when the automotive industry was rising in automation as well. So the whole country was sort of deeply interested in automation, and I loved it. I got swept up into it and found that fascinating. But I really wanted to do corporate strategy work. I would see strategies unfold, come down on high from the executive towers, and I always wondered, where did these strategies come from? How did they formulate them?
Yeah.
And so I went back to business school to try to get there, climb up there. I went to the Sloan School at MIT, and strong emphasis on the quantitative side of things at MIT.
Sure.
Understanding businesses as if they were an engineering problem. That was MIT's philosophy on things.
Yeah.
Even in their business school.
It's fun. As opposed to Harvard, where you understand business things as if they're a social problem.
I took some classes at Harvard actually, and yes, so their focus is on leadership.
Yeah.
So it was really great being up there in Cambridge and being able to cross the river and see the different philosophies. Neither are wrong or right; they're just very different.
Right.
Born of different views of the world.
Right.
And when I got out of graduate school at the ripe old age of 39, I then went to work in corporate strategy. Then, after doing that for 7 years, I then started my first firm myself, hanging my shingle out there, building models for companies.
Yeah.
And I was
building models, meaning, because actually this was something that I'd been wanting to talk to you about, in addition to the other thing that you want to talk about, because there's a lot of, in recent years, in the last few years, the concept of models has been in the public square a lot, in the news.
Definitely.
People hear about models regarding the weather and the climate, and they hear about models,
Going wrong.
COVID, there was models, and either economic models, and
not to mention trying to predict political elections. Some famous failures there.
A few, and I'm not sure that a lot of people, when they hear about these models, that they really know what, like. So what's like so you said you started building models. What's like a layman's understanding of, like, what is a model?
Well, the kind of models that I work on, and believe me, there's many different kinds of models as the places where the sun shines. I work on these things called digital twins.
Yeah.
So that is when you have a real asset, a plant, a supply chain, a factory, a business of any type, even a bank or an insurance company. And what you want to do is recreate that real asset in the computer.
Yeah.
A mirror image of it. And once it's in the computer, then you can play with it. You can run experiments with it. You can try a different product line, or try to stick a new piece of machinery in there, or anything that you can imagine that you'd want to do in the real world, you do in the digital world.
So
and then you get
is
insights.
like a simulation?
A simulation. That's another good word
Yeah.
to use for these digital twins. Once you get insights as to how these things behave in the digital world, you can take those insights and then layer them back onto the real asset, knowing that it's been vetted, that policy has been vetted in the digital world.
Right.
So that's the typical model that
you
I
work on.
But
So if we abstract that to this notion of models in general, when people hear about all these different models, like what are these models that people hear about?
a model of any type is always trying to forecast something, trying to tell you something about a phenomenon. So we have hurricane models. Here we are in the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
We have lots of hurricane models, and they all have sort of.
They've gotten remarkably, when my family moved here in '82, Hurricane Alicia happened in '83.
Yes.
So I've seen a lot of storms since then, and everybody likes to, throw shade on the weather service. But did I say that right, Trev? Is that a? I'm trying to be like with the cool kids.
Throwing shade is a
Shade,
legitimate term.
Is that he's so, but they've gotten better.
They have.
They've gotten way better. Like if you look at, where the predictions and there's the cone of uncertainty or whatever they call it, right? Like they've gotten pretty good at it, I think.
They've gotten a lot better. The data has gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
And so that obviously improves the quality of the models.
Well, this is something that comes up, right? Which is, and this is what we hear about some of these controversial models, like whether it was COVID or climate, and you hear people who are arguing against, or the antagonists say, of which I have been one, in certain cases, are saying, yeah, but you're rigging the data that you're feeding into the model, or you're just using garbage data that you're feeding into the model. And so therefore, either because you're manipulating the data a certain way or because you don't have good data, what comes out is, the old garbage in, garbage out.
I could put one word lasso around what you just said, and that's bias.
Yeah.
So we have bias that slips into models, and every modeler is subject to this. And what they teach, what they certainly teach you at MIT, is to check your bias to make sure that is not, that your objectivity is pure when it comes to building the model, and that you have no preconceived notions. There was a famous mea culpa of one of the people who I won't name, who built a model looking to predict the 2016 presidential election, which of course President Trump won, and very few people weeks out from that election predicted that Trump would win. All the models, as you say, were pointing to Hillary Clinton winning, and she didn't, and by a reasonable margin, she lost. So why is that? And so there were people who sort of were very honest about looking back and say, how did we get that wrong? And there were a lot of technical explanations, oversampling of certain groups and things like that. But it all really stemmed from an inherent bias that sort of clouded their decisions about how they designed the model.
Yeah.
Bias is it's a sort of an invisible cancer that gets into models. So models, by definition, Michael, they're wrong.
Right.
It's just a question of how wrong are they, and what is the basis of them. But every model in the universe that's ever built is all designed to help us understand the world better, either a future world or the current world that we have.
Well, so while we're on this, there's another little sidebar, which is probably a discussion for another day. But so at MIT, they teach you to make sure you check your bias at the door.
Yeah.
But I think in the real world, sometimes it depends on who's paying for the model to be built.
Right.
Right. Whose payroll are you on?
Yes.
And then it becomes, and then I think there's a lot of pressure put on people sometimes to make things turn out a certain way.
Yes.
And so it's a huge, like, when you're in a field like this, like what you're describing, integrity is a huge thing, right? Like, I mean, integrity is always important. No matter whatever you're doing, integrity is important. But in this case, it's really important because you can mislead so many people if you have even the slightest compromise of your intentions.
That's right, and that's why there's kind of this trend in the modeling community that I come from around transparency.
Is it fun saying I'm part of the modeling community?
I got to be part of some community. A lot of people are very focused on transparency. So you talk about integrity. Well, integrity means transparency.
Transparency, right.
You publish not only your data, your methodology, and you get people to critique it.
There was quite a bit of clamoring on that. I remember, like during the peak of COVID, and there was some people in the, I guess, in the modeling community or in the science community who were saying, how come they're not sharing their data with us? How come they're not, there was a lot of complaint about this lack of transparency. Now, why that was, I mean, who knows? There could be any number of reasons.
That's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
If you ever see a situation where people are not willing to share their underlying data, that should be a huge red flag.
Yeah, kind of something's up. Anyway, so okay, so I did want to park on models there just for, that sounded a little bit weird. So back to you. So you got into this modeling business. So I guess what I'm getting from that is this interest in business and corporate strategy come together with the math that you were never really that good at in the first place. That's where models. That's kind of where models, those things meet. That's where models are.
That's right.
Because now you're using math to try to inform business strategy.
That's right. Yeah. So businesses are under relentless pressure to be better, faster, cheaper. I mean, I see it all the time. You have a business that's successful. Oh, you grew your revenue 20%. Okay, congratulations. Next year, you now have to do 25% more.
Yeah.
They can't escape this extreme pressure to be better, faster, and cheaper. They've tried all of the normal things, and we've seen that. They've invested in technology, good for them. They've looked at lean principles, good for them. So now they're down.
They brought in the Bobs, right? Remember the Bobs, the consultants?
Oh, yeah, of course. They brought in all these gold.
What exactly is it that you do here? Yeah,
exactly. I've seen a lot of that too.
Yeah,
and fine. So they bring in expertise, good for them. So what they're down to now, after having tried all these things and had some successes with them, is the more nuanced strategies. And nuanced strategies means you're using science. You're trying to understand the science of how this business works. Why does it work the way that it does? And are there any levers we can push and pull to make it work even better? Michael, I'm starting to work a lot with investors now.
Yeah.
Private equity companies that buy other companies.
I hope you're staying in good shape because they will run you ragged.
Yeah, they do. They do. They're very demanding. Yeah. Pure capitalists. I love it.
Like there's not a single spreadsheet in the world that can't be done 10 different ways.
Yes.
Right. You have
100 different ways.
100 different ways. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're quite an interesting group of clients to have, but their motivation is fairly pure. They buy a company.
Right.
It produces value A. They now want it to produce value B. What is exactly is the path to get from A to B? And increasingly, that comes from the world of science. Yeah. How can we crawl over this company virtually and figure out precisely how it ticks so that then we could figure out ways to make it work even better? And sometimes better just means more productive. So if you did X number of units one year, in the next year, you want to do 3X units, but with the same amount of labor,
right? Same cost,
the same amount of material, the same amount of variable cost. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, so you were using automation and models, and I think the first time I had you on a podcast, we made all the model jokes, like not the ones in magazines, right?
Right.
But bumper sticker, I love my model. So you're on the early cusp of a lot of these things, and there's a lot of things that we could talk about along the way, but in the interest of like the theme of the show, we fast forward to today and we look at life in America. It's the same anywhere else, but this show's only about America, so that's all we care about. And there's a lot of, and you and I, you mentioned earlier, the future of work.
Yes. Because
all of a sudden, some of this fancy stuff that's been done in whatever back rooms you were working in, helping people figure out their strategies and whatnot, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar. I mean, it's a continuation of the same types of innovation, and now it's like thrust into the forefront of everything.
Right.
And of course, Chat GPT. You saw, so we already did
All the
episode.
generative AI platforms.
Right, and and people, and there's excitement, but there's concern.
Yes.
The interesting thing to me is, so a couple of years ago, I think you and I, we had a panel discussion. Maybe it was during COVID, because I think maybe it was online, and it was about, maybe it was at one of those events, and we were talking about bringing AI specifically into the oil and gas community, and there was this notion of, well, what if it replaces, you got very specialized, highly technical jobs like geoscientists and petroleum engineers and things like this, and so there's some debate about, yeah, that robot isn't ever gonna, replace my, and but now, it's, so you could look at that and you could say, okay, well, that's something to figure out for all those really specialized people that have those really smart jobs. It doesn't typically affect the average person. But now, it's like coming a little bit more into the regular world. And in fact, I stumbled on something, and this is actually from a couple years ago. Hey, Trev, can you get the thing, the Get app link? So this is from 2021, so 2 years ago, future of work. And scroll down to, yeah, that picture right there. And what this person was predicting, 2020, 2030. So here's the really interesting thing is, and I want to get your take on this, George, but it's the bosses that get replaced in this picture by automation, by robots, right? So here, this is just a marketing department, and you have like all the people doing, there's all the typical roles of a marketing department, and then when you go into the future of the future of Hal, it's RoboBoss. And I think I can kind of get my head around how that might happen. And then there's a couple of other automated in the ranks, but now you're not just talking about doctors or lawyers or geoscientists or these, like, because for the average person, they're like, yeah, fine, I don't really like doctors and lawyers anyway, so you want to give me a robot, that's fine with me, right? But this is, and I don't know how accurate or how this is, but this suggests that there's places, when you talk about the future of work, it's not just those specialized, highly paid people who are afraid that their jobs might get replaced by a robot, but it could really change the composition of how organizations and teams work.
Right.
Is that real?
That's right, Michael. I mean, that is a thing that robots or bots, so maybe not a physical robot, right, but
certainly not that one.
Some hunk of software.
He can barely hold on to a baseball cap.
Yeah, he's doing a good job. But these bots will enter the workforce, and they will act in a way like a coworker. So there's a lot of distribution centers out there, for example. If you go into them today, a fairly modern one,
yeah,
what you'll see is that the machine is really in charge. And what the humans do in that distribution center is make sure the machine is well fed and cared for, has the materials it needs, has the information it needs. So the sort of master worker relationship has shifted a little bit, at least in terms of distribution centers, places that move packages around.
Yeah.
It doesn't particularly surprise me that somebody's come up with analysis and said that, the so-called bosses are getting replaced by bots. Because if you think about what does a boss do, or what should a boss do? Well, a boss should organize work, allocate tasks, dole out projects, check statuses. Those are all very rule-based tasks. Those are actually the easiest for a piece of technology to take over, less so than a very sort of specialized task that maybe a planner or an analyst or somebody like that does. And on top of that, the economics work better. A boss is, paid this much. A worker below two levels below the boss is paid that much. economics works better. So that's really where the automation is going to start happening.
Is there like some kind of a podcast producer guy bot that could take over for? 'Cause- Actually, the economics right now are working in my favor. So
Let's go ahead and go down that thread. You mentioned, is there somebody who can do podcast? Is there a bot that
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do podcasts and replace me? I think it's going to be at least in the next few decades. It's going to be less about, oh, let's figure out how to replace Michael with a robot.
Yeah.
It's going to be more about, well, could Michael run 10 podcasts? Could Michael run 100 podcasts? So it's
Right.
really more a question of leverage. That's really what I'm seeing when I go do plant tours all around the country, which I just went through 5 plant tours in 5 weeks. That's really what they're after. They're not after, well, I have 100 people, let me fire them all. It's, I have 100 people, I'm going to keep 100 people, but I want to do 3x or 5x or 10x what I did last year. How
Yeah.
do I do that?
Yeah.
That's going to be, at least for the next few decades, that's really going to be the focus, not replacement.
Yeah.
So all these people who should know better out there putting a point of view across that there's going to be mass unemployment and things like that, I'm just not buying it because I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing senior leaders tell me, well, I just can't wait to fire all my people. It's really much more of a productivity argument.
Got you. So I think that's yeah, because and actually we had this article we looked at a few weeks ago when Ration was here, and we were talking more about kind of the technical aspects and kind of the moral dilemma. And ChatGPT specifically, we determined that he uses it to do his kindergartner's homework. So I think at that point, I think we're all doomed. But and the thing was, well, pretty soon. So the premise was, and this was on the basis of singularity and the machines taking over, and the premise was, well, pretty soon there just isn't going to be that much work for humans to do. But humans, we all still deserve to have a decent living. So this is where the argument for universal basic income comes in. Like, well, we're going to have to just give people, which of course, pretty soon you get past that, and pretty soon you're at the level of Star Trek where, well, we just don't have money. We don't need money. Everything is kind of allocated and provided, right? Which to some people and it's funny how, to some people that sounds like a utopian future, and to some people that sounds like a dystopian future, and it just sort of depends on your point of view. But what you're saying is we're not anywhere close to that.
I'm not buying that whole line. I know there's a lot of writers and thinkers who are sort of pushing that.
It's good news, Trev. Your job is secure, at least for
my job is certainly
a while
secure.
longer.
This really relies on a premise that we're going to keep standard of living at exactly the same level of output. And that's just not going to be the case. A person of Michael's capacity is going to be expected to run 10 podcasts or 100 podcasts. And that's how you're going to earn your economic value. It's not like, oh, there's this just fixed amount of output that we're expecting from everyone. So as that output,
And there's a displacement, right? You're
yeah, as
saying
that
it's
output
not,
gets taken up by robots, then there's not going to be anything for people to do. People have not really picked apart that argument logically. That our standard of living and our standard of output has never stayed still. As the technology rises, so does the expectation of output. So therefore, there's not going to be mass unemployment. There's going to be a sort of a dithering of the employment. And so, in other words,
Yeah.
again, not one podcast per year, but 10 podcasts per year or 100 podcasts per
Right.
year. And that is the economics of how you're going to make your living.
Okay, but if I fall back to my basic understanding of economics, which I actually got from Henry Hazlitt and his little book on economics in one lesson, something has to. So, sure, it's great to say that we can increase output by 10 times, 100 times, order of magnitude, whatever, but something has to consume that output, right? So how does how does society continue to, like, if there's not a demand for it, then it's not going to, like, what? So it's great if I could produce 100 podcasts instead of one, but if there's not people to listen to it, or if my 100 podcasts suck compared to my one.
Right.
By the way, if this one, I don't know if you noticed our grenade, but if it, oh, you asked about it earlier.
I did.
Yes, you asked about the grenade. Yeah, that's it. So if the
It's
show,
hard to ignore.
if the show's no good, I don't know. Is the grenade in the shot, Trev? Have the grenade in the shot? Yeah. So if we're no good, or we're boring or whatever, then Trevor runs out and he pulls the pin.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That would be a problem.
Fortunately, that hardly ever happens. So,
But let's go back to
but how do, I guess what I'm saying is, how do you maintain economic balance? Just to say we can increase output, like something has to, like everything has to stay in balance, right?
But again, I go back to history, Michael. Demand has never subsided. When
you got a
we
point.
were and using horses and buggies, we had yay many roads in the United States. Let's
And
say.
that's what they said. They said we got yay many roads.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and therefore, oh my goodness, why do we need something that goes 10 times faster than a horse and buggy? Because we've only got so many roads. Well, the roads didn't stop getting built. The demand to get on those roads never stopped.
Fair.
So
yeah.
It's just
We
all
have no
this.
historical precedent for
Our economy never stands still.
for wasted growth of output.
Right. That's right. And so all this point of view that I see being put across that ultimately yields a mass unemployment sort of scenario, it rests on this assumption that our economy is going to stand still, and just isn't.
Yeah.
It just is not. So I am not seeing the this whole thing. Now, temporary displacements, no doubt about it.
Sure.
There will be these
Rearranging
these
things, yeah.
5 to 10 year displacements. I mean, that is absolutely true. But in the long run, our economies will absorb a lot more people into a different set of skills. There was an article just this morning, May 8th, in the Wall Street Journal about citing a statistic about 60% of the jobs that existed some years ago, some few decades ago, don't exist today or have been
I saw that. Yeah.
rewritten. So that's going to happen even more in the future.
60% is a lot.
That is a lot. That's the
Yeah.
whole economy
Yeah.
being restructured.
Right. So, yeah, well, this is what always happens, right? Is we, as things change and evolve, and there's always somebody, there were the people that threw the shoes into the, what was it?
Yes.
This is where we get the word sabotage, right?
Yes. So when I wrote that book, Michael, I went back and I studied these sort of inflection points in our history, the
Yeah.
Renaissance period in Italy, the 1760s in England, when machinery, the steam engine was being created, and machinery found its way into the textile business, which was a huge industry.
Yeah, well, that's
back in
where
England.
the whole
Luddite movement.
Luddite movement. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
gave rise to the Luddite movement, where there were strikes,
It
and
was
riots.
socks, right? Like what they called stockings at the time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They were making those, and there were riots. There was violence,
Yeah.
and at every point in history, Michael, that we can look back on in the modern world, our economy has been able to absorb even these incredibly sweeping changes in technology. So where's the evidence that that's going to be very different this time? Now, people have argued with me and said, well, wait a minute. It is different this time because things are happening much faster. Back in 1760, things just moved at a slower
enough, yeah.
pace.
Yeah, it's true.
This is way faster, but we're adapting way faster too.
Yeah.
So I am not seeing any justification for this very bleak world that people are putting across, at least in terms of the this mass unemployment. Now, people have also raised, and you raised also, the idea of, well, it's kind of scary. AI is a little scary.
Yeah.
Is it going to harm us in some way.
We've all seen The Matrix.
Yes. Terminator movies, I've heard every joke, as you can imagine, because I like work in that field, and people ask me if I'm going to build a Terminator. Sometimes when I'm in traffic in Houston, I feel like building a Terminator. But no, not building one. Look, so about that, I think it's important for people who aren't really in the know about AI, what's going on. We've had AI since a little bit before World War II. In fact, it was actually used in World War II for code breaking and for other strategies.
So that's fascinating. I love the history thing. How was it done exactly?
Well, they were at the cusp of modern computing back then. They had computers in World War II,
Yeah,
and there
they
was
were as big as this building, but yeah.
there was a group of scientists in the UK that were looking at very sophisticated computing facilities, and they were using that for a lot of it was used for code breaking, but some of it was used for very common things like determining the ballistic pathway of shells and things of that nature, designing warships. But that was the dawn of using computers for something really practical and useful.
But how was that AI though?
Well, they took intelligence that they had gathered and they used that as data. So anytime you take human intelligence and codify that in a machine, that's
Right.
artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
Now we
right.
like to think about machine learning these days as being equal to artificial intelligence. That's one brand of it.
Got
But
it.
taking human knowledge and recapturing it in a computer, that's justifiably artificial
Interesting. Yeah,
intelligence
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So we've had AI in that sort of flavor for a long, long time. That's not really new. We take a piece of software and we train it to accomplish something that a human can accomplish. That's been around a long time. What's different in the last year or so is something called artificial general intelligence, AGI.
Yeah, I've heard of it. So I think, in fact, Rachel and I talked, narrow AI versus not narrow.
People sometimes call it
specialized or
deep learning and things of this nature. Essentially, if I can boil it down, and my AI scientist friends, please forgive me, but it's learning how to learn. So there was an experiment some years ago by two Cornell professors, and they took a bar of metal and they hung it on a hinge. So this bar of metal swings back and forth like a pendulum, right? And then they took another bar of metal and they put a hinge on the end of that. And so now this thing swings back and forth in complicated ways. And they took a piece of software that they built that was steeped in AGI, and they had it simply observe this bar of metal moving back and forth. And it reverse engineered Newton's second law of motion.
Wow.
That's a flavor of AI that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And so when you have things like you mentioned ChatGPT, what is that? That's something that has now been trained on language. It has essentially crawled the entire internet to gather every piece of evidence of language to learn what it can learn. No presupposition, no, hey, I want you to find out this. It just is unleashed. And that's what scares people, and justifiably so. Like, what is it going to learn? And could it learn bad things? Could it learn how to steal a car?
This whole,
could it learn how to break
bias problem that you talked about comes into play as well, because if it's learning from, if the internet content that it's learning from has a bias built into it, right? Like for example, what sources create the most content on the internet? Mainstream media, news sources, entertainment, right? Things like this. So, and those agencies or agents, as you will, are they're putting out tons and tons of content every single day relative to the unbiased scientific study that comes out.
So if it just blindly learns the slanted content, it's going to be slanted
it's
itself.
Gonna be slanted, right?
Yeah. So again, the people, particularly the people in OpenAI, recognize this and they get it to learn what slant is.
Yeah. Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has some capability
It
to
just
sort
got
of
scary. It
de-varnish.
just got scarier.
Yeah, and we even do that ourselves. You know,
Right.
we
Well,
get a
have
lot of data
we
that.
talk about that. We talk about having a certain filter. Well, you got to have a filter when you look
That's
at
right.
this, right?
That's
So,
right. So they practice
but
that
this comes back to the thing that
as
you
well.
said early on, which is taking what a human knows and does and putting it into a computer, not just the factual things or the sequential things, but like, so what you're saying is conceivable to teach the computer, to teach the machine how to have a filter for certain things the same way humans do.
That's right. That's right. And
That's a little bit mind-blowing.
AGI is the thing that I believe that's the reason Elon Musk is calling for a pause in
Well, he's launching
new
his
AI
own company.
development. Yeah.
Although I love
He is.
Elon, but
And as,
everybody needs to stop. By
I
the way,
don't,
I'm
I don't
launching
know
a company.
Elon, but I do follow some of the things he writes about, and he writes pretty intelligently about a lot of subjects. And this on this one, he's pretty good, I believe. But he was calling for a pause in new AI development. You know, it's no secret that OpenAI is working on the underlying platform behind ChatGPT, which is called GPT and GPT-4 and 5 and 6 and so on. So they're working on all these developments, and people are a bit scared about this AGI, this thing that can learn what it can learn. But here's the issue, Michael. We cannot stop that. Other countries aren't going to stop it. Nobody's going to be able to stop someone from using technology. So the answer always is, and the ethicists will tell you this, the answer to the scary side of AI is more AI. I'll give you a practical example. The FAA is deeply concerned about hackers taking over an airplane in mid-flight, especially if it's an airplane that doesn't have a pilot, because that's coming too. So what's the answer to that? Well, the answer to that, and has been
It is AI to be
more
able
AI.
to catch the hackers.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
So you don't have one machine pilot in an airplane. You have 9 of them. And if one of them goes rogue, the other 8 will outvote that person, maybe even take them offline, outvote that AI, take it offline, and then continue to fly the airplane normally. So that's the only way to meet the dark side of AI, if I can say that, is more AI on the
Yeah, this is
bright
why I
side.
think the Matrix is real. But but no, but interesting, because on a simpler view, it was within a couple or a few weeks that Chat GPT hit the public scene that I saw an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, about this college kid who was using OpenAI to write a similar something like ChatGPT that could determine whether a piece of content had been written by
Right.
ChatGPT.
Right.
So you could, so
My
presumably, like,
recollection is he did a pretty good job.
he did a really good job. Yeah.
The high percentages on
And
that.
so if you're a college professor who's worried about that with your, with your students, taking advantage of that, you could run it's the same principle that you're talking
Right.
about, right?
Right.
So,
That's always going to be the answer. Is more AI.
yeah.
So while I appreciate Elon Musk's call for caution and safety and everything, we can call for all the pauses we want. It's just not going to.
Yeah. And when Raytion was on a few weeks ago, in fact, I think maybe you and he were on that same panel that I was talking about together. But he said the same thing. He said, it's happening. So what we need to do is figure out how to integrate it and embrace it in a way and work with it in a way that like you can't just tell people not to do it.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
And that's kind of Michael, that's kind of a nice segue into what we really wanted to talk about here, about the future of work.
Funny, I was just thinking that.
Which is
so we've allayed all the fears and all this. So if I'm just like an ordinary American and I just want to know what in the hell is my life going to be like as I try to live the next 20 years and go to work and do what I got to do, like, how does it? Okay, so fine, it's not the end of the world, but how is it different, and how do I
It's going to be different in the sense that the skills that our economy is going to value are those skills where you are figuring out ways to apply this wave of new tools that's coming our way.
Right.
So I'll give you the example of an attorney. I'm working with a lot of attorneys these days on a interesting model for them.
Sorry to hear that.
Has legal ramifications. No, it's actually fascinating.
Yeah,
Legal business is fascinating.
Yeah. Actually, I have known more than one attorney in my life who's actually a pretty good person.
Oh, they're
So,
good people. At least the people I work with are great. So when you think about what an attorney does, let's say a litigator. What does a litigator do? Well, you get a new client comes into your office and says, "I've got this legal problem. I want to sue somebody, or they're suing me. What do I do?" Well, the first thing that lawyer is going to do is collect all the facts and kind of figure out a legal strategy. Okay,
Right.
we're about to be sued, so what is our possible defense of that lawsuit? And so that attorney is then going to turn to something called Westlaw, which is a comprehensive compendium of every court case in the United States. I think it even extends outside the United States. And he's going to throw in a few keywords and figure out how if there are other cases that either support your strategy or doesn't support your strategy. Now, typically in a large firm, that's going to be the senior partner is going to ask a junior associate to spend all night, looking this up. And that junior associate comes in bleary-eyed the next morning and says, "Okay, I found these 5 cases that are relevant." And so that's a very sort of manual effort. What I see happening is that's the tools like Westlaw are going to just be back ends.
Yeah.
And there's going to be middleware that people are going to use then to find these cases and figure out the different pieces of those cases that then you can use to mount an appropriate defense to that. So it's the same.
So what happens to the poor bleary-eyed
outcome.
associate whose life sucks but still is trying to work through that phase to get to the next phase?
Well, that associate 10 years from now better know how to use these tools.
Yeah.
Better know what they do and why they work the way they do. And these law schools better be teaching them how to use those tools.
So this goes to the dithering thing that you said earlier. So it's not now that the attorney goes and uses the tools and doesn't need the associate anymore, because the attorney's not going to do that, right? But the firm may expect that the associate can now support 10 attorneys simultaneously, right? Or 10 cases or 10 whatever instead of one at a time, and the associate will be able to do that without sacrificing all their sleep
with a high level of quality. So the whole name of the game is finding that possibly very rare case where a judge ruled in a jurisdiction similar to yours in your favor, and here was his legal reasoning behind that.
Yeah.
That is.
And
those are
why
devilishly
wouldn't
hard
we want to
problems.
make that an easier thing to do, right? Like nobody like nobody should have to, right? That makes sense.
Yeah. And it's crazy how difficult it is to do tools like Westlaw are great at what they do, but it's still an enormously difficult job to comb through all these legal records and find these cases.
Yeah.
Because you're not just Google searching something. You have to find it, then you have to assess the case and look at the arguments that were made. I mean, it's a lot of analysis.
Yeah, it makes sense. But again, that's also, the vast majority of Americans work in jobs where there's lots of different people doing lots of different things.
Yes.
And I'm coming back to that thing we looked at earlier where, like, here's a marketing department, and all of a sudden you got these robo bosses. And you said, well, what does a boss do? They schedule work, they package work, so that's one component. Now, another component of what a boss does is they foster teamwork, morale, provide guidance, coaching, things like this. But as I'm sitting here thinking about it, there's no reason why well, you couldn't take the boss role, split it into two different things. The stuff that could be automated, which is like the boring crap, right? Like packaging work and scheduling and whatever. And you could have something else that maybe isn't a boss, but is a coach, team mentor, play. So, like there's some that role is still like. Is that a? Am I going down the right path with that?
Well, I think so. You and I grew up in an era where we had bosses. We had some good, some bad.
Yeah.
But the good ones would come by our desk and, how's it going, Michael? You doing okay? You feeling good about things? That's how we grew up.
Yeah.
And so that's
Pull the
what,
team together, go out for happy hour, go out for lunch,
exactly,
like whatever,
exactly.
right?
So
Yeah,
that's
like,
what we expect in our workplace.
yeah.
Now, I have two daughters, one in her 30s and one in her 20s.
And they don't care at all about that, do they?
They seem to be they
Yeah.
not only do they look at me funny when I describe, how bosses should behave. They claim they don't even want that. They don't want to interact with them. They want to get their assignments and do their assignments. Yes, they want advance. Yes, they want more compensation. Yes, they want to feel like they're making a difference, but they don't feel like they need that boss element that you and I are very comfortable with. So the jury's still out.
Not only that, but there's whole philosophies built on these notions of how to, there's the old leader, not a manager, and which I never really bought into that, but or how to create high performance teams.
Right.
But what your daughters are saying is, I don't need any of that. Give me what you want me to do. I'll get it done.
Right.
I don't.
And that's it. Yeah. Now, but you started by saying, well, wait a minute. Maybe there's this sort of split of roles. There's the mechanical get work done, get task done thing, which easily is done in an automated way. But then there's the softer skills that is the boss that cares about people and communicates with them.
The guy with the coffee cup that says,
How's it going?
I'm going to
today?
need you to come in Saturday.
Right, exactly. So maybe that is less a boss function and more works like a personal fitness coach. So this sort of
Right.
floating
Yeah.
resource that goes around and makes sure that people are happy and well supported and
Right.
that sort of thing. That doesn't necessarily have to be a boss role. That could be another role entirely.
What do you think, Trev? You're the younger generation. You got any insights on this?
That the whole notion, failing idea that not the
Mm.
aspect of society that needs
Because we're tribal. Yeah.
a
B-
well,
basically. Like we need.
yes, but that's how do you integrate society and
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah.
So like I don't think that it's impossible.
Yeah.
That's really only a lot of people out there who
Yeah. But you're saying that you're taking the human element out of it, and these microcultures
it's not
as
just
society.
human, but then there's the other thing where it's like, I don't robots are gonna create cars and people
Hmm.
Yeah.
so that's not work a job and we establish I could see we create jobs that we have to serve run
Yeah.
to run the
Like it's
company.
a
We get to the
feedback
point
loop
where
on
we
you.
serve
Yeah.
not just robots,
Hmm.
Mm.
rather than the purpose.
Yeah. You started out with like, I might want my boss to be like a real person, and you kind of took a dark turn there at the end. He surprises you sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
The
why
end of
the
the world started with
yeah, that was it. The beginning of the
his
end.
point of view is why I made the statement the jury's still out, because I hear all over the spectrum, his point of view, which I think is a good one, is, well, wait a minute, there's the extreme of, I want no human boss whatsoever. I just give me my tasks and I'm good. Then there's, well, I need some affirmation that there's a human out there that's sort of looking at me and my record and what I do and how well I do it and
Right.
so forth. So I just don't know. But
Yeah.
what I do know is that your point of view about, gosh, we have to have this boss sort of floating around our cubicles asking how we're doing and how our weekend was. That's our era.
That's
That's
our
not
yeah,
necessarily the new one.
That's true. Funny thing is, I never really liked that guy, but
I liked a few of them. I didn't like a few
yeah.
others.
But you know what's interesting though, as you're describing that, I'm thinking about, and part of what Trevor said, the first part before you got all dark with the serving to serve, um, is it's interesting that our society, so other developments in society that we often don't look very highly on, like the fact that people don't interact in person very much anymore, and everything happens, sort of in this disconnected, asynchronous social media, right? And we talk about, like, actually, it's almost preparing society to be okay with this, like, humanless work construct, right? Because you and I liked having that dynamic with a boss that we know thinks what we're, you're right. It's that affirmation. It's like, and I've said this before, where early in my career, I mostly cared about, like, we weren't so much worried about like all the causes in the world and everything. We were more worried about, like, I want to do a good job, impress my boss so that I can get promoted, so I can make more money. You know, not to be totally self-serving, but like I had little mouths to feed, and
Yeah.
that was what you cared
You have
about, right?
family to take care
Yeah,
of, and that's how you did it.
And so it was important to me that you had the recognition, because I knew that recognition and that affirmation was how I was ultimately going to win favor and move forward, right?
And that's probably how your parents did it, and so
Right.
forth. Yeah.
But now I can see where, um, because of the way society uh, has been changing in recent years, maybe perhaps that's not so important to people. To your daughters are what age are they?
One's in her 20s and one's in her 30s.
Yeah, so same as this guy. Now he's a little weird, so it's not surprising to me that he has a point of view that isn't the same as the average
Right.
20 or 30-year-old.
But they're getting married. You mentioned, well, I have a family to take care of, and that drove probably a lot of your point of view on how you
Right.
saw your work. They're getting married a lot later.
Later, right? So you're not worried about that.
They're I'm sure they're concerned about families. To be honest, I don't really quite understand the philosophy of this philosophy of the younger generation. I wish I did understand it better, but it's just so different
It's best if you
from
don't.
what I'm. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I should just
But,
not
but
know.
but there's another aspect too, which was kind of what Trevor was getting at is society has always had these basic constructs and dynamics and things like this. I think of it as being tribal, not so much tribal in the sense of this tribe fighting against that tribe, but we want to know, like tribal in the sense that there's a leader of the tribe. We all have this sort of common purpose
Yep.
where the leader is looking out for us. And if we move away from, if because of the way we work and if these things are happening where over here we got a different way of interacting with people has caused us to not care about certain things and conveniently that works out well with this whole era of robot bosses. However, how does it impact society? Like, how does society change going forward in that world? It may not, it'll certainly be different. I don't know whether I could say it's better or worse, but
Yeah,
and it may be a painful transition because not everybody is gonna get there at the same time.
well, that's true, and there people have raised the point, but maybe this will lead to a greater polarization of society and a bigger wealth gap and so forth. I wish I was a social scientist and I could authoritatively weigh in on some of these things.
But it makes you
But it's really strange, Michael. Living in the era we're living in now, where the technology can do so many amazing things, and you're working just like we work every day, using these technologies, and I kind of wonder about the social impact of some of the things that I do, but then I just got to get this technology working. I got to get these bugs, resolved.
Because you got a client and you got to get paid. Yeah.
So I just say, okay, well, I can't think about that right now. I got to think about
Right.
what to do here. I'm just relying on ethicists and people who know what they're doing. People at the leaders of these companies. Doing the right thing with respect to this technology so that it doesn't get out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, and that actually gets into another aspect, which is so there's a high all of this is all well and fine. Well, I should say it's all fun and games until humans with bad motives get involved.
Yep, and they will.
And right now, there's a very high level of suspicion in society on at both poles and all the different sides of different issues. Perhaps more than, I remember. There's a continuous high level of suspicion that bad actors are at work in so many different things. Right. And people are constantly trying to, I don't know, maybe it's because I spend too much time on Twitter, but people are constantly trying to like uncover and point. But even in the mainstream media world, CNN and the Washington Post take every chance they can to try to uncover some nefarious thing that Fox News is doing or somebody else. Right. And the New York Post is in the middle, throwing hand grenades at everything, and so, but it does make you wonder, and there's this high level of suspicion about did somebody create this pandemic because they had some sort of a plan to, and we have evidence from 2016 that they had this whole they did this whole kind of dry run of what something like this would be. They even called it COVID, right? All of these things are kind of in the public conscious in a lot of
Yes.
cases right now.
Yes.
And so when we start talking about the technology, the AI, and it's very, in your view about, look, like all these fear factors, you can lay that all aside. There's a good purpose here. There's some things that aren't known, but we can kind of go down this reasonable path. I could see where some people would say, yeah, well, guess what? Like, not everybody thinks that way, and there are bad motives out there, and they're going to use this to their advantage. And and Klaus Schwab in his crazy Star Trek uniform, or whoever it is, right, is going to use this to like take over the world.
Yes. Well, there's no question that bad actors are at work right now today using a lot of these tools for various reasons. And they're inventing elaborate schemes to make money, to target people or target groups that they don't favor, and so forth. That's happening. That's happening at a couple of different levels. It's happening at the individual level. Think of the guy or gal in a basement somewhere in some random part of the world, working out something.
It's not a basement, it's a command center.
It is a command center.
Yeah.
And then there's the state actors who are getting funded by governments to go out and do this. Those are the people I worry about a lot more. That is happening. It has been happening for a long, long time. And we've had some notable problems with that. We've had attacks. We've had cyber attacks. Our cybersecurity apparatus has done an okay job at preventing attacks. But, there's, pick up the newspaper and you'll read about some failures here and there. But generally speaking, they've kept ahead of these bad actors. So I am, again, I wouldn't call myself an optimist, but I would say I'm a realist about the ability of these bad actors to do significant damage. They will do some damage, but I believe that our defenses will stay up with that to an extent that we won't have a collapse in society because some bad actor gets a hold of AI.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot has to happen, to have a collapse in society, to have somebody take over the whole world, whatever things people are afraid of.
Well, and people need to take heart. People who are scared need to take heart in the fact that there's a lot of bugs out there. Even ChatGPT, if you work with it a lot, it comes up with bad answers. It comes out with incorrect answers. And why? Because it's a software system like any other, and it's got bugs in it.
Yeah.
So the real practical thinking that, oh my gosh, this stuff is going to take over the world. Well, I invite you to come to our shop sometime and see all the bugs that we generate on a daily basis and have to fix. The technology is not perfect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true. And I think another thing that maybe people worry about is, well, we've seen in recent years, where with the advent of not just the internet, but the degree of interactivity, social media, all the media channels, and it's not just the 11 o'clock evening news anymore or whatever, right? It's everything all the time,
right?
And everybody has a voice, but what we've seen is with all of that, it's pretty easy to push large segments of society in a direction, right? To either to persuade people, to influence people, to I'm not saying influence elections. I'm not going down that path, but like there are levers. If you're a person or a group of people that wants to impact society in some way for your own benefit, that's not necessarily good for the people. There are levers that you can use now that didn't used to exist.
Yes, indeed.
And this feels like a big one, right? This feels like a big lever. But as you said in the beginning, it's happening. So, you know, although Trev, what did you say last time? You said you're just going to go somewhere where nobody can find you. And I said, I think you said, you said I'm going to go somewhere, and then I tried to explain how satellites work. So I don't think there is anywhere you can go where nobody can. But apart from going completely off grid, right? And I actually know a guy who has a house out in the Midwest somewhere.
Oh yeah, I know some of those.
It's completely off grid, propane powered, right?
Yep.
Like it makes me think of Will Smith and Gene Hackman, Enemy of the State, right? Where he had to blow up the whole thing because he made a phone call.
Right.
Apart from that, we need to find a way to integrate these things into life.
Yeah, and so the scenario that you mentioned about someone or some group and their ability to leverage influence over a large population and cause that population to do harm in some way, riot, vote the wrong way, whatever it is, relies on sort of a vacuum of, well, that person is the only pulling the lever, is the only one pulling the lever.
Yeah, fair.
Could there be another person pulling the lever a different way?
Yeah.
And so does it all wash out in the end? I think it probably does. I think there will always be, kind of this diversity of views. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
That keeps us whole, that keeps us away from, a single sort of monolithic action that could cause harm to the country.
Yeah, good point. I think sometimes it feels like one small number of views is prevailing excessively, but when you net it out over time, things catch up with each other, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And everybody's always, willing to readily admit when they're wrong.
Well, and I think for Trevor's generation, they're a skeptical bunch too.
That is for damn sure. That is for damn sure.
That's healthy. That's
Yeah.
really healthy. I'm glad.
They're more skeptical than the group that came before them. That's for sure.
Yes, indeed.
That's for sure. So, all right, this is good. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap up. So, George Tanner, thanks for making time.
Thank you for inviting me down.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't mean to keep you waiting so long, but I wanted to get to where we had an actual audience first.
All good.
But we should come back. This will be really interesting because as you mentioned, things are moving fast now. So I feel like we could come back in a couple 3 months and probably have some more discussion, or maybe a little bit longer than that.
Well,
and things will have happened in that time that we could talk about.
Things are always happening, and there's always good material to talk about that people don't always get exposed to. But the other thing too that we didn't talk about, since we talked about the future of work, we didn't talk about the future of education, which is tightly linked. And for all the people out there in your audience who are moms and dads of high school kids, and they're really wondering, okay, how should I steer my kid?
Right.
And what should I tell them? What kind of guidance should I give them? I think you and I, we're working in the trenches, and we've got some insights to convey to those folks. That's a conversation we should have.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's come back. We'll come back in a little bit, and we'll do that one.
Betcha.
And that'll be fun. All right. That's it. We're done.